The Easter proclamation says that these are the feasts of Passover. It says that Easter is the night when God led Israel's children from slavery in Egypt. We can't ignore that the very word for Easter in Latin and Greek, Pascha, is pretty much the same word as the Hebrew word for Passover, Pesach. In fact, for many years, early Christians celebrated the resurrection of Jesus on Passover. But it's more than the fact that Jesus was likely celebrating the Passover meal on the night before he died. Join me and Rabbi Aaron Flanzraich as we look at Passover, what it is and what it means.
I think it's clear, and you might correct me because I might be wrong, but I think it's clear that Passover is probably one of the more important feasts, if not the most important feast for the Jewish people.
Passover is listed in the biblical record as one of the 3 pilgrimage festivals.
Yes.
And interestingly enough, Passover is the first of all the holiday festivals. So for example, when you look at the biblical record, there are no names given, with the exception of 2, but there are no names given to the months in the biblical record. They're only given numbers.
Yes.
For example, Rosh Hashanah, which we celebrate as a Jewish New Year, is listed in the Torah, in the biblical record, as being the 7th month of the year. And that only makes sense if we count it from the month of Passover.
Which is the first month.
Which is the first month.
Nisan.
And so what the month of Nisan, what the holiday of Passover really initiates, is the entire schedule and record of the Jewish holiday season.
Which is interesting, and I had never noticed that until you mentioned this to me, because that's how chapter 12, Exodus, begins. Today shall, it doesn't begin, go kill a lamb. It says, today shall be the first month.
Right.
So they had no calendar before.
It's about establishing a proprietary calendar. Now the Jewish calendar has some unique functions, elements to it.
Yeah.
It's a solar lunar calendar. The months are established by the cycle of the moon, but the annual number of days is set by the solar schedule.
Okay. So Passover, before we kind of unpack that word a little bit, does it have anything to do with time? Other than telling us
what day, right, what date and time. So it has a great deal to do with time. One of the important elements of the holiday of Passover is its seasonality. And what I mean by that is that Passover, according to Jewish tradition, must be preserved in a particular season. And which season is that? So Passover has 3 different names in the biblical record. It's called Zman Cherutenu, the time of our redemption or freedom. It's called Chag HaMatzot, the holiday of matzah.
Yeah, the unleavened bread, or feast of unleavened bread.
And the 3rd name is called Chag HaAviv, the holiday of the springtime. And so one of the things we learn from that is, also taken from the biblical record, is that Passover must be preserved in its correct season, which is the season of spring.
Yes. Okay. So, and we'll get back to those 3 names, but it's interesting because I would say that there is a 4th name because you didn't say Pesach.
That is true.
Isn't that the name?
Yeah, true. No, that's a fair point. It's called, the holiday is not referred to as Chag Pesach, the holiday of Passover.
No.
It is referred to and said that we are to get the Pesach for ourselves, which is the lamb that is sacrificed, that is eaten at the Seder table, which is the ritual meal that we have on Passover night.
And we're going to get to that. So the word Passover, Pesach, what does it mean?
Good question.
We know what it means in English, Passover.
Yes, yes. So the English name Passover comes from one interpretation of the name. And one interpretation of the name is from the text. And it says that on the 10th plague, that God Pasach al Batei B'nai Yisrael, that God passed over the homes of the Israelites and only afflicted the homes of the Egyptians with the 10th plague. And on account of that, the holiday is called Passover because God passed over their homes.
So the word Pesach means to pass?
Right.
Or,
so the word Piseach in Hebrew means to pass over things.
To pass over things.
And so the lamb the Paschal lamb, or called in Hebrew the Karban Pesach.
And Karban is offering? Sacrifice.
Right, it's an offering. That it commemorates the event where God showed mercy to the Israelites by passing over their homes.
Okay, so, and you mentioned it was the 10th plague, so we know the story of Moses and the Exodus and the 10 plagues, the mother of all plagues, killing of the firstborn of not just the Egyptian humans, but also all the animals, firstborn, unless they had sprinkled the blood of this lamb, the Paschal lamb, on the doorposts.
Right.
So God appears to Moses, or speaks to Moses, and tells him what?
God says a number of things. What in particular are you looking?
Specifically, what to do to avoid this plague.
Right, and so simply that they must sacrifice the lamb. And why the lamb?
Yeah, that's...
Like, why the lamb? And the reason why is because the lamb was one of the gods of the Egyptians.
Okay.
They weren't offering the lamb to God.
Right.
They were demonstrating their repudiation of the religion of Egypt.
Killing the god of Egypt.
Right, and they were saying that this is not our God. And on any home that this blood is found on, it is not their God either. But our God is the God of the Hebrews, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. And it is this God that Moses comes forth and gives them a new name. And this name is the name of the covenant that they will now bear with this God.
Right. Is there a significance that it's a 1-year-old male lamb?
I think it's just, that's the formulation of...
Or unblemished?
Unblemished, that it should be pure, because that was probably the form of the lamb that the Egyptians
would use. Okay, so then is there a significance to the blood other than
the blood is the life force.
The life force.
Right?
Yes.
By taking the blood out, you basically say this no longer has a life force to it.
And is there a significant, because you're not just killing it, but you're eating it.
Right. Once again, it's a repudiation of it. I'm using it.
Yes.
It has no dominion over me.
Right.
It doesn't use me.
I use it.
I use it.
Okay.
So it's an appropriation and a repudiation.
So what else is, so God says, find the 1-year-old lamb, unblemished, kill it, put the blood on the doorposts.
With the azov, with the hyssop.
With the hyssop branches.
Right.
Roast it, don't boil it, don't roast it. That's
Open
important,
roasted, which draws the blood out too.
Right.
Right.
Eat it with unleavened bread.
And eat it with matzot, with the unleavened bread and bitter herbs.
Bitter herbs. So what's the significance of the unleavened bread and the herbs?
So the bread and the herb, let's break them down a little bit.
Yes.
Okay, so let's first look at the bitter herb. So the herb has two components to it. One, it's green, so it symbolizes springtime. The other thing is that it's bitter, and it doesn't have, we're not talking in your language, caliente. We're not talking
not
spicy.
No.
It's not spicy.
Yes.
It's an herb.
Yes.
So it has a bitterness to it. And one of the things with bitter herbs, and some examples of a bitter herb might be romaine lettuce.
Yes.
It has a sharp bitterness, but as you chew it more and more, it becomes sweet.
Interesting. Interesting.
And one of the lessons the rabbis derive from this is, well, not only that there's the green, the spring component to it, but there's also the component that the slavery experience in the beginning, like difficult moments in our life, they become bitter, but over time, there's a sweetness because difficult moments, they transform us.
So that's
we
that
grow.
Redemptive.
That is the redemptive narrative in this. Now, matzah. What's interesting about the matzah, the unleavened bread? There's a few components to it. One, and one of the books here in my wonderful shelf and collection of books, one comment offered by a Turkish rabbinic scholar about 200 years ago. His name was Yaakov Kuli. Kuli says the reason why matzah is such a powerful symbol on Passover was because the Israelites made matzah when they were leaving Egypt because it was the only food they knew. That the Egyptians gave it to them to eat when they were slaves. And so this was the food that they had learned to make. And what is so particularly horrible about the matzah that we want to commemorate it? What's particularly horrible that Rabbi Kuli points out is horrible about the matzah is that anybody who's ever eaten unleavened bread knows that it bloats you, but it has no nutritional value. So the Israelites were actually starving even though they felt full. They were starving to death. And I think that the appropriation of the Israelites, soon to become Jews, with using the matzah as one of the great symbols of the holiday, is once again part of this redemptive narrative, this arc of adaptation, where we take something that was a symbol of our degradation and we repackage it as a symbol of our redemption.
Interesting, interesting, redemption again.
But also unleavened bread has an additional motif to it, and that is the motif of humility.
Right. Now, because I used to think, because you hear that it says later on, in fact, the chapter says that they couldn't wait for the leaven to add the leaven, so they had to take unleavened bread. But
which is hard to imagine.
But the prescription was there before.
Yes, it's hard to imagine. How long does it take? 20 minutes, 30 minutes, an hour for something?
I don't know. Interesting, interesting. Now, there's another prescription to this ritual. So to kill the lamb, take the blood, eat it as a family, roast it, eat it as a family. But then also, it's a perpetual...
Hold on, I want to stop you there. Eat it as a...
family.
Yes.
In family, or if the family is not big enough, to group with...
No, but you're sitting down as a group, not as a nation.
Right.
But the drama takes place on a family level.
Yes.
Once again, the story of children. Because think about it. Think about it carefully. Pharaoh makes a decree of infanticide to kill children. The children, how are they killed? They're thrown into the Nile.
Yes.
The first plague is the plague where the Nile turns to blood. It's a warning to Pharaoh that the crime of killing children is coming to his door.
Yes.
And if he doesn't let the people go, it will not end.
Yes.
And he ignores it, and then the 10th and final plague is what?
The killing of the firstborn.
The killing of the firstborn, because what is the ultimate end of the story? It begins with the first part of it. The blood in the water was a symbol that they must be an atonement for the killing of these children.
Yes.
And Pharaoh does not heed it. And all the subsequent plagues, he does not heed. And only when it comes and it afflicts him does he break down. Only when he touches and is touched by the pain that he caused to others. When he learns the most important element of human life, and that is empathy. To know what others have gone through. Does he submit to the reality of what he has done?
Right. Is there a significance to the day that it has to be, all of that has to, I was going to say that there's another part that there's a perpetual ordinance that it has to do it every year, but you do it on the 14th. You can't do it on the 10th or the 20th. What's with the significance of that date?
Well, that date is the date that the Jews prepared to leave Egypt. It is maintained for eternity as a day that is set aside for that observance. When the Israelites were in Egypt, they had a very different kind of Passover celebration that I will have at my table in a few weeks.
Yes.
That Passover that they celebrated in Egypt is known in rabbinic literature as the Egyptian Passover. Pesach Mitzrayim, it's called. And then we have what you read in chapter 12 in Exodus. Then we have something called Pesach Lidorot, or a generational Passover, which is maintained by Jews for thousands of years.
Yes, and it's evolved, and I think I want to get to that if we have time. So God says to Moses, do this. Is that, can I call it that meal? Can I call it a ritual meal?
Yeah, absolutely.
Is there an element of worship in that meal, in terms of, I guess, worshiping God?
The action itself is devotional. We're following the ritual, it's prescriptive, and that is devotional. That's an act of worship. An act of worship.
Because God tells Moses to tell Pharaoh to let my people go and worship me. I think we forget that. We forget that part. It's always let my people go.
Right.
But it's let my people go so that they can worship me.
Which is the redemptive element of this liberation.
Yeah, yeah.
That we understand that life without meaning is a life that has no redeeming quality to it. And that God, in our perspective, is the most meaningful thing in life. And that's the redemption in this.
So that was the first Pesach. Presumably a year later. Well,
They didn't have to tell the story, by the way, at the first Passover.
That's true.
They were living it.
Yeah.
What eventually becomes is the requirement to tell the story in this generational Passover is because it marks the movement from the eyewitness to history.
Yes.
From the experience to memory. And few people are as adept at preserving memory as the Jews.
Yes. So now the Passover that you're going to be celebrating with your family in a few weeks, that is part of your ritual, is to remember that first Passover, isn't it?
Not the first Passover. It's to remember the Exodus. That's what we remember. The Passover is the commemoration of the celebration of the Exodus. So
you're remembering the whole thing.
What does it say in the Bible? It says in the Torah that you will tell it to your children on that day as if they had left Egypt.
Yes. Because you were liberated.
Right.
Because you were enslaved.
You were redeemed.
So is there a
How many times in the biblical record does it say, because you were slaves in Egypt?
Yes.
Right? That the memory of that experience is meant to create, once again, two things: gratitude and empathy. Without those two elements, we can't live as human beings. It's impossible. We become ogres, we're cruel, we're insensitive. Gratitude and empathy.
Yeah. Is there a sense when you celebrate it today that somehow that devotion or that ritual meal is, not that it's bringing you back in time, but that is making that experience present to you, to Jews today?
So I'll share with you words that were offered by Israel's first Prime Minister, David Ben-Gurion, in 1947 when he appeared to the United Nations. And he made this comment. He said that Americans or Europeans had been living in North America in excess of 300-400 years. And he said, we have a rough idea of when they arrived in North America. Nobody knows what they ate on the boats, right? What they named their kids. We know nothing about any of that. And yet, on the 14th day of Nisan throughout the world for over 3,500 years, Jews have collectively gathered. We know their names, we know what they ate, we know what they did. And it's not, I think, it's not in so much as a simple act of re-experiencing the Exodus, as it is year by year by year, laying the groundwork of creating a foundation for the perpetuation of memory.
So in a few weeks, when you sit down with your family, you will be eating lamb? It'll be roasted?
We don't do that anymore.
No.
No, we don't roast the lamb. The rabbis were specific that once the temple was destroyed,
so that was, okay.
Right? In fact, in some traditional Jewish communities, they don't eat any roasted meat. No dry meat, dry roasted meat. It has to be cooked in liquid.
Yes.
So we'll have a holiday meal that will have meat and lots of delicious foods.
Yes.
There'll be a ritual meal prior where the Haggadah, the story will be read, involving everyone there. One of the great challenges and one of the great opportunities of it is the constant reinvention of the narrative to find new ways to engage people in it. And that's what you'll see.
So the ritual meal also would involve the eating of the matzah, the bitter herbs?
The bitter herbs. There are symbols on the Seder plate. There's an egg, a roasted egg. There's a lamb shank that is a commemoration.
So that's symbolic.
Right? So it's symbolic, only
but you don't eat that.
We don't eat it. There's charoset, which is a mishmash of apples and honey and and wine, which commemorates the mortar that the Israelites had to make to build the bricks, to build the cities for the Egyptians, which is a symbol of their slavery. And
so the wine, you mentioned the wine in the dip, but is there wine
and
that
then there are 4 cups of wine.
4 cups of wine.
Yeah, each one, because there are 4 distinct words used for the redemption of the Jews out of Egypt.
Yeah.
So much like you would make a toast, we have 4 cups of wine.
I see. So in closing, the Passover meal today commemorates not necessarily that first Passover, but the whole Exodus experience of liberation.
Because think about it, the first Passover was celebrating their Exodus.
Right.
Their exodus.
Yes.
Our Passover celebrates their exodus, because without it, we wouldn't have one either.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
The Lord said to Moses and Aaron in the land of Egypt, "This month shall mark for you the beginning of months. It shall be the first month of the year for you. Tell the whole congregation of Israel that on the 10th of this month they are to take a lamb for each family, a lamb for each household. If a household is too small for a whole lamb, it shall join its closest neighbor in obtaining one. The lamb shall be divided in proportion to the number of people who eat of it. Your lamb shall be without blemish, a year-old male. You may take it from the sheep or from the goats. You shall keep it until the 14th day of this month. Then the whole assembled congregation of Israel shall slaughter it at twilight. They shall take some of the blood and put it on the 2 doorposts and the lintel of the houses in which they eat it. They shall eat the lamb that same night. They shall eat it roasted over the fire with unleavened bread and bitter herbs. Do not eat any of it raw or boiled in water, but roast it over the fire with its head, legs, and inner organs. You shall let none of it remain until the morning. Anything that remains until the morning you shall burn. This is how you shall eat it: your loins girded, your sandals on your feet, and your staff in your hand. And you shall eat it hurriedly. It is the Passover of the Lord. For I will pass through the land of Egypt that night, and I will strike down every firstborn in the land of Egypt, both human beings and animals. On all gods of Egypt I will execute judgments. I am the Lord. The blood shall be a sign for you on the houses where you live. When I see the blood, I will pass over you, and no plague shall destroy you when I strike the land of Egypt. This day shall be a day of remembrance for you. You shall celebrate it as a festival to the Lord. Throughout your generations you shall observe it as a perpetual ordinance."
That was on the night of the first Passover. That first Passover celebrated the first Exodus, the Exodus of the people of Israel from Egypt. But it was their Exodus. When Jews celebrate Passover today, they are also celebrating that first Exodus, because without it, Jews today would not have their own Exodus. We Christians also have our own Passover. It's called the Mass. When we celebrate the Mass, the redemptive act of Jesus on the cross is made present to us again. That is our Exodus, the liberation from slavery to sin and death into a life everlasting. Let us pray.
Father in heaven, you are the Lord. You are the God of Abraham, of Isaac, and of Jacob. You are the God of Israel, the God who is I am, the God who is Lord, and the God who is one. Help us live continually that exodus from slavery. Help us move towards your redemption and your salvation. May we always let go of slavery and go forth that we may worship you.
Amen.